Hello anime fan, welcome back to What If Animes 2.0. So in this video you gonna see, what if Naruto became Kaguya's vessel? This is part 1. And if you want more then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. So let's getting the video and do check out the author of the story. Otsutsuki Kaguya had been watching. For 7 years now, that was all she had been doing. She was little more than a passive observer of the truth. At first, watching was all she had been able to do. It was hardly what one would call ideal, but that was the very nature of her resurrection, in that it hadn't been ideal. It was imperfect. Incomplete. In the same way those disgusting humans that would taint her garden world were incomplete, so now was she. Kaguya loathed them, for they had stolen everything from her. Sealed her to the moon for over 1,000 years. Then they forgot about her. That was their first mistake, for she was not something that should be forgotten. It was careless of them. Foolish, even. To think she was some existence so little as to be tossed away from collective thought was the height of incompetence. She, which had once been known as the rabbit goddess and later an Oni, was forgotten. And she would make them pay for it. Because while they may have forgotten, she had not. Her will had not. It had gone by many names over the years. Preferring to think of itself as her son, it would be more accurate to have called it her shadow. It had worked tirelessly for her resurrection and it had finally succeeded, but only in a sense. The shadow knew that in order to restore her, numerous conditions had to be met. So it had secretly been gathering those things over time. Her true son, Hagoromo, had split up her chakra into 9 pieces. So her will collected most of those pieces. Not enough that anyone would notice, just mere slivers of them from the Jinchuriki hosts they inhabited. It had been enough. The reason why, is because alone those pieces of Biju chakra, her chakra, was only a single piece of the equation. Equally important were the eyes. Her son knew she needed those eyes and so had destroyed his own upon death. However, what he failed to foresee was the actions of his own children. For he also had 2 sons. One of them Indra, the other Asura. Those 2 would conflict with one another for centuries and over the course of many reincarnations. Until one day, one of those reincarnates got an idea. No, it wouldn't be right to say he got an idea. He had been fed an idea. By her very own shadow. Indra's reincarnation stole a piece of flesh from Asura's and by grafting it upon himself, he finally awakened those eyes. Even then, it wasn't enough. For him it was too late and he perished soon after having accomplished this task. For the shadow, it was the perfect opportunity. One they had been waiting over 1,000 years for. Taking the eyes, Rinnegan, it implanted them inside itself. Now all the pieces were nearly in place. It had 8 slivers of chakra from the Biju and the Rinnegan eyes cultivated by a reincarnation of Indra. The only thing left was to get the last piece, the Kyubi, strongest Biju of them all. Once it had the merged chakra of all 9 beasts, incomplete as that may be, it would then place the eyes once more in another host. Since the last one had been Indra, this time it would be Asura that they chose. As fate would have it, those 2 things coalesced. Asura's newest reincarnation became the Kyubi Jinchuriki on the night of his birth. Even so, her will couldn't be hasty. They had waited 1,000 years, it wouldn't hurt to wait 5 more. Which is exactly the amount of time that it waited. On the child's 5th birthday, her shadow made its move. Not in a way that anyone ever realized. For the resurrection to be complete, time would be necessary. So it had to give Asura's reincarnation, Uzumaki Naruto, these gifts in a way that no one would immediately recognize. In order to do this, it merged itself with Naruto's shadow. Her will, her own shadow became his. Along with all the things it had gathered. All these things mixed together and became one. Her will couldn't possibly maintain itself amongst such a vortex and so even that became mere nothing. And from that nothing she was reborn, a mere child. That was right, her form had taken the shadow of its host. So in appearance she may have been much like she had desired. Long white hair, pale skin, even reclaiming her ceremonial robes. However, she was small. Inhabiting a 5-year-old had been their mistake, because his shadow only allowed them to take the shape of another 5-year-old. A miscalculation. It was no matter. She would leave, hide herself away in the forests until one day she reclaimed her full adult form. This imperfect resurrection left her without most of her power, so she would need time to recover that anyways. That was what she thought. Her second miscalculation had been assuming she could leave at all. Of course she couldn't, she realized only too late. She had no shadow. That meant there was no place for her under the light of the sun, nor even the moon which just reflected its light. She was trapped, bound to the shadow of Asura's incarnation. Even under such circumstances, she did not panic. There was no need for worry, after all. Even stuck in this shadow, her plans didn't have to change. In time she would achieve adult form and her power would return. That was what she believed, her third miscalculation. For she had placed her powers inside a former Jinchuriki. So when she replaced Kyuubi, she had done so in the most literal sense possible. That meant her power was to be held back, kept in check and for use by none other than Uzumaki Naruto himself. A mere boy of 5 years old, so for the next 7 years she could only watch. Watch as he aged, becoming a prepubescent man while she did not change. Her chakra returned, but only enough to fill the body of the 5-year-old-like container she was now trapped in. In a sense, it was enough. Even in her weakened state, she was far more powerful than most adults. With perhaps few exceptions, despite this, it wasn't enough to break free from the shadow. Watching might not have been her only option, but when she considered the alternatives, it was the only thing she desired. What would she do if not watch? Speak with Uzumaki Naruto? No, she would not sully her voice by giving him the chance to hear it. After all, he was just a mere human. A thief like all the rest of them, who had stolen her chakra. She had nothing to gain from trying to communicate with him. It was these thoughts that Kaguya assumed she could hold on to. That she could somehow be an impartial juror long enough for something about her situation to change. This was her final miscalculation. For she had forgotten, but she was once a mother. Even in this 5-year-old body, those instincts did not disappear. She thought she had destroyed them long ago, when she had resolved herself to fight her own children. However, being in Naruto's shadow changed that, and watching him reminded her of all those things she thought she had discarded. This was the humanity's second mistake. That they would dare place all their anger, cowardice, and malice on the shoulders of one small boy ignorant of sin. He was blamed for the actions of the demon fox, a once malevolent creature given shape by chakra and for a time sealed inside him. The arrogance of man was thinking that meant the two were one and the same. That arrogance led them to acting out all of their ugliest desires and wills. Uzumaki Naruto was scorned, cursed, beaten, neglected, and hated with the weight of a full village. No matter where he turned, there was no salvation that could possibly be found. The ones who had promised to protect him had abandoned their posts. Those who didn't resent him merely watched from afar. And those who were ignorant of it chose to remain that way, because their ignorance was truly a form of bliss. He was in hell. All alone in the darkness with no one to help him. That was why Kaguya would wait no longer for something to change. Watching Naruto reminded her of many things. Of her children when they had been his age. Of herself when she had been scorned by the people of this new world she escaped to. Of her own desire to just be loved. Before she had even realized it, Kaguya's plan had changed. With it, so too did her fate. She was no longer the woman seeking to reclaim everything for herself. Instead, she would just settle for revenge. Against all those who sought to keep her imprisoned and those who would harm the master of her shadow. The time to enact that change was now. She would watch no longer from his shadow. That was because the last straw was here. Naruto laying on his side in some back alley. It was hardly poorly lit, orange lights dancing in from just off the main road. It was the height of the evening nightlife. Many people passed by the alley, their shadows coming and going as they hurried past without a care for what was happening inside. Even if they did know, not a single one of them would have stopped to help. That was just how they all were. Woohoo! A younger man yipped in joy, the toe of his boot drilling into the young Naruto's ribcage. The young blonde let out a cough, blood spraying from his mouth and staining the already garbage-filled pavement. This is great stress relief. I might just keep him as a punching bag. A second man cooed with laughter, stomping down on the downtrodden boy's calf with his heel. I've been waiting a long time for my crack at him, damn fox. The third and final man of the despicable trio was digging through the trash, searching for something. This will do. He finally seemed to decide, pulling out an old and rusted pipe from deep within the darkness of the garbage. Naruto could not have possibly seen what it was, but he heard the metallic clinks as the man tested it out against the brick walls. The sound was almost grating, echoing vibrantly inside the small alley and out into the street. Yet not a single person paid those noises any mind. No one was coming to save him from out there. Is this kid really training at the Ninja Academy? The first one asked again, continuing to kick and stomp at Naruto as he talked. He hasn't even tried fighting back. This is too easy. He knows he can't. The one brandishing the pipe crouched down, licking his teeth as he leered over the beaten blonde. Don't ya little hellspawn? He then rose up to his full height, placing the tip of his foot down on Naruto's cheek. No one cares if we beat on you, but if you hit back, well, that's it for you. He raised the bar over his head, muscles tensing as he prepared to bring it down. That's far enough. Otsutsuki Kaguya demanded, her voice coming simultaneously from everywhere around them and yet nowhere at once. The fuck? The three men spun around, looking for the source of this new voice. None of them saw her as she emerged. No, perhaps they had seen her, but it was impossible for their minds to understand what was really happening. That's how outside the realm of possibility Kaguya's first emergence was. The lights outside had cast the shadow of Naruto's prone form up against the nearby dumpster the metal pipe had just been dug out of. Floating up from that shadow now was Kaguya herself. Standing at even full height, she couldn't have been much more than 100 centimeters. Her long white hair was taller than she was, extending down and into the shadow, unable to come out completely. Atop her head was two horns, almost giving her the appearance of a rabbit. A Hyuga? One of the men asked, finally locating her. He was mistaken, of course. Kaguya was no Hyuga, one of the elite ninja clans located within the village. She was much older and far more ancient than that. Even so, he wasn't mistaken that she did share their Byakugan eyes. Before her imperfect resurrection she had a third eye, but that would not open. Not in this incomplete form. Just a brat, the man holding the pipe said, still positioning it above his head as if to swing it at any given moment. I don't know where you came from, kid, but get lost. This doesn't involve you. Run. The raspy voice of Naruto chimed in. He could barely see her, the skin around one of his eyes swollen shut. The other blue orb was partially pressed against the dirty alley pavement, tears slowly leaking out. Even so, he called out to her in an attempt to protect her. To not get her involved in this fight. In a situation like this, he would care about others more than himself. Which was precisely the problem and why Kaguya would deal with this right now. Thou concern is unneeded. Be silent while we eradicate these vermin. She spoke to Naruto and Naruto alone. To someone such as Kaguya, even the fact that humans as lowly as the others had heard her voice was in a way tainting it, as if somehow making her more impure for allowing them to interact on the same plane as she existed in. That didn't matter, for she was about to erase them anyways. What the hell was that, you bitch? 3 small thunks cut the man off before he could say anything more. None of them had realized it, but Kaguya had already prepared her attack while she was talking to Naruto. For her it was as simple as raising a single arm, pointing at them with her hand curved into the shape of a finger gun. Then from the tip of her finger, a gray bone had shot out, tearing through her own flesh as it did. She had done this 3 times in quick succession, all while the one man had taken a step forward to yell at her. That was the last thing any of them ever did. Before there was even time to scream, the little bullet she shot them with caused a chain reaction. They turned to ash, originating from the source of the bullet wound and expanding to the rest of their bodies in a matter of seconds. As they broke down, fear and brief terror flashed across their eyes, before those 2 dried out and disappeared, becoming nothing more than a gray pile of dust on the ground, awash in the orange light from the main street outside of the alley. What did you just do? Despite his injuries, Naruto attempted to jump to his feet. He failed, only to collapse back to the ground and land on his butt. As he tried to scurry backwards and away from Kaguya, his shadow shifted and danced in the light. Wait. Still thyself. Kaguya called too late, his shadow falling away from the dumpster she stood atop of. The shifting shadow dragged her with it, sending her sprawling onto the dirty, garbage-filled street below. She hit the concrete with a loud thud, letting out a small groan of pain as she rolled over. Sorry? Naruto said. Despite the fear and confusion still racking his whole body, the slightly comical sight of the little girl falling from a dumpster was enough to calm his nerves. Although only temporarily, as he once more looked back at the piles of ash where his assailants had just been. Did you kill them? He asked, still unsure if that had truly been what had just happened. Not long before this, those 3 men had jumped him while he attempted to pass this very alley. They had struck him in the head first, dazing him and making him unable to react. The one man had been wrong earlier, when he assumed Naruto didn't fight back because he was afraid of higher retaliation from those in charge. The truth was, Naruto didn't give 2 shits about stuff like that. His opponents had just been adults that blindsided him and made it impossible to get a firm grip on what was happening until it was too late. That was all. Except now. They were dust. Lower thy voice, lest others learn of what we did, Kaguya urged, holding a hand up and glancing around the surrounding area with her Byakugan to be sure. It was fortunate for them that most people wanted to ignore Naruto, as it also meant they weren't going to check on the men she just murdered. So long as no one had seen the initial act, there would never be any proof of what had happened to them. They were as good as vanished. Not that Kaguya cared about such things as human laws or their fear of death, neither of which were things she was capable of understanding to begin with. All the same, it would be inconvenient for her if the master of the shadow she was bound to found himself incarcerated for charges of murder. Wait. Naruto yelled, suddenly pointing a finger at her in accusation. Don't lump me in this together with you. You did that by yourself, even if you were trying to save me. Thanks by the way, but don't act like I had anything to do with whatever you did just now. Ah, his voice was suddenly cut off, the pain from earlier returning as he got over his shock. His eye was still swollen and several ribs were cracked. Not to mention all the bruises and other internal bleeding he no doubt suffered from at the moment. Kaguya sighed. We doth not refer to thou and us. We use it only in direct reference to Kaguya as oneself. She picked herself up, slowly ambling over to him to inspect his injuries as she explained. You mean you refer to yourself in plural? Naruto asked, before then letting out a hiss of pain as Kaguya poked at his swollen eye with her sharp nail. Kaguya, was it? Kaguya-chan? Even sitting down on the ground and Naruto wasn't much shorter than her. Refer to us as thou please. Kaguya snapped, applying a slight Jiyuken touch to the wounded area around Naruto's face. It wasn't much, but the swelling was already subsiding as the wound mostly healed on its own. As Kaguya inspected his innards, she noticed even his cracked bones were beginning to mend themselves. Apparently a side effect of being linked directly to her, but his healing was extraordinary. There was one other thing she noticed, a sudden swelling of chakra in the palms of Naruto's hands. This is, she whispered in awe. What is this? Naruto asked, feeling the pulsating in his hands. He let out another hiss of pain, not sure what was happening. The palms of his hands ached in searing red-hot pain, as if his skin itself was being torn open. Which might have been an accurate description of what was happening, because as he looked down at his hands, 2 purple eyes looked back up at him. Not just ordinary eyes, but eyes with a multitude of concentric circles, Rinnegan. Kaguya clarified. We see now, so that is what happened. She had always wondered what happened to the Rinnegan eyes that her shadow had stolen from Indra's reincarnate. The eyes had never manifested themselves in Naruto before now, despite the fact that they should have. It would appear the trauma from watching 3 men turned to ash in front of him had been the emotional trigger necessary to unlock them. As far as she could tell, it was an incomplete awakening. That was why they opened in his palms and not where they should have in the sockets attached to his brain. Incomplete summed up about every part of this botched resurrection, however, so it was no wonder this didn't go as it should either. If anything, this was the more expected outcome. I don't really get it, but is this gonna be okay? Naruto slowly turned his hands over, inspecting the back to make sure nothing was there. He then slowly curled in his fingers into fists, the Rinnegan eyes shutting themselves automatically as he did. When he unfurled his fingers, the eyes opened back up. Weird. He was at least handling the sudden appearance of them better than Kaguya would have hoped. Thou shalt be fine, Kaguya assured him. She began to sink into the earth, merging once more with Naruto's shadow. For now, seeking nourishment would be wise. Sustenance will help thou heal. In mere moments she was gone. Wait, where the hell did you go? Naruto leapt to his feet, this time successfully and without once more collapsing to a heap on the street. He spun around in circles, looking for Kaguya but failing to catch any sight of her. Even if he could stand, the sudden twirling motion didn't sit well with his injured head and he nearly topped back over. An arm coming from his shadow in the wall caught him, holding him upright and preventing that. No. Naruto shook his head, surprising her by revealing the opposite instead was true. He looked down at one of the rinnegan on the palm of his hand. It's weird, I always thought I would hate it, if someone that always cursed me died before I could make them change their mind. After you killed them though, I just felt relieved, kind of like thank goodness, now I don't have to deal with their stupid cowardly bullshit anymore. Does that make me twisted? He asked, smiling sadly as he turned to his own shadow. We do not think so. Kaguya said simply. She had no idea what concepts a young human like Naruto might view as right and wrong. However, she did know one thing. If feeling remorse for the loss of those three was what modern humans considered to be proper, she would reshape their views starting from this moment. Naruto nodded in response. Slipping his hands in his pockets, he then walked out from the alley and left those 3 piles of ash behind. To him, they were gone now, both in the physical sense of the word and to him emotionally. He would offer their ashes no respect, nor would anyone else know they were ever there. Reduced to mere garbage to be swept up and thrown in the trash with everything in that dirty street. Just like that, the curtain peeled back as the first proper meeting between the two that would shape the entire ninja world unfolded. The cruel stage play had already begun. Yet no one had been there to witness it but the main actors themselves. Otsutsuki Kaguya and Uzumaki Naruto. Hey, Kaguya-chan. Uzumaki Naruto stopped walking, turning to look at his shadow. It was the same as it always was, but now that he looked at it a little more closely, he realized there was something just a little off. To the average observer, his shadow wasn't unusual. However, now that Naruto was aware of it, he couldn't help but notice the slight difference. His shadow, it was darker than the shadows of everyone else around him. As if 2 shadows stacked on top of each other. It still wasn't much of a difference, but it was noticeable enough to him now that he couldn't help but wonder how it had never come up before. Or perhaps it was because he was now different. He couldn't resist the urge to pull one of his hands from his pockets, unclenching his fist to look down at the purple eye that gazed back up at him. The rinnegan. That was what the girl in his shadow had called it. Move it, brat. Before Naruto could ponder much more on the issue, he was violently knocked aside as one of the passers-by roughly shoved him with their full body weight. The 12-year-old blonde was sent stumbling, nearly collapsing once more onto the dirt path. He only caught himself at the last second, but it wasn't without consequence. His calves burned, head swimming in pain, and it felt like one of his ribs had cracked yet again. This was the unfortunate truth of his circumstance. Having only just been saved from the worst beating of his life, he had yet to fully recover. Yet despite the obvious injuries and unclean state of his clothes, no one offered to help him. Why would they? Everyone hated him, with few exceptions, for reasons he did not yet even comprehend. You can hear me, can't you? Kaguya-chan? Which was why he didn't worry about being seen talking to his own shadow in public. No one paid attention to him anyways, and even if they did, they would just assume the worst of him. Probably figured he had finally lost his mind or something. Yes, we can hear. What is it thou wants? Kaguya finally gave up at ignoring him, a single Byakugan eye popping out from the darkness of his shadow to look up at him. Without a proper mouth materialized, her voice merely echoed inside Naruto's head, something only for him to hear. She truthfully didn't desire to speak to him at all. For her, it had been 7 long years that she existed inside of his shadow. Yet during those 7 years she had not spoken even once. It was as she had been afraid of, but now that Naruto knew of her presence, he desired to speak with her, regardless of time or place. Naruto shrugged at her question. Nothing in particular. Just making sure you're still there, I guess. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say he was just confirming that her earlier appearance in the alley hadn't been some fever dream. We are always here. Kaguya answered, simple as that. As if it was just a common fact for someone to live in another's shadow. That's so? Naruto asked, apparently satisfied to know he wasn't alone. He turned around and once again started limping forward. His destination wasn't far, but it had taken him time to even make it this far on his bad leg. He just hoped she had been right earlier and that eating would help him recover faster. Not like there was much point in going to the hospital, where they were likely to turn him away. Which was why he went to one of the only places he knew that wouldn't throw him out. Naruto-kun, The slightly older girl known as Ayame called in shock as the young blonde pushed back the flaps to enter his all-time favorite ramen stall. "Are you okay?" she asked, walking around from the back to better get a look at the state Naruto was in. "I'm fine, Nei-chan." Naruto grinned at her, attempting to downplay the severity of his injuries to little success. There was no bluffing his way through this one. Just a little fight, which I totally won by the way. You should see what they look like right now. In a way, those words weren't a complete lie, geez. Ayame huffed, bending down as she examined the still slightly puffed skin around his left eye. "Well, it doesn't look too bad." She relented, although she wouldn't be able to say that if she had seen it not 10 minutes before this. Your clothes on the other hand. In the light of the shop, the true state of Naruto's orange jacket and pants was much more apparent than they had been under the pale moonlight. Exactly as Ayame noted, they were disgusting, covered in pieces of trash, dirt, blood, and possibly ash of the killed men. I guess this is pretty bad. Even Naruto couldn't deny it now that he got another look. Not seeing much choice, he unzipped the jacket and discarded it onto the floor next to a seat for the moment. Beneath the jacket was a black shirt, the symbol of Uzu Shiogakure marking the front and rear. Ayame, the master of the ramen stall, called for his daughter. "See if we still got those shorts upstairs. They're probably a little big, but at least they'll be clean." His daughter immediately voiced her agreement, disappearing around the back of the shop as she went to get what her father asked. "You don't gotta do that." Naruto tried to insist, but a shake of the head from the master silenced any protest. "Well, if you say so. Thanks, Oji-san. I'll just have the usual, you know. Make it 2 of them, but a kid size for the second." As he placed his order, Naruto carefully inspected the seats. There were no other patrons at the moment, so he had free reign over any stool, but he seemed to be paying special attention to the way the light was cast over each seat while making his choice. "That's rare for you to order yourself a kid's size," Ayame said as she returned, not moments after she left, the aforementioned shorts in hand. As previously noted, but they were indeed quite large, extending well past his knees when he pulled them up over his orange pants. Once they were on, he slipped the pants off from underneath. Then by tightening the strings on the inside of the seam, he just barely got them secure enough to stay up without slipping down. With that, he tossed the old articles in the trash, the orange attire unsalvageable as it was. "It's not for me," Naruto clarified, grabbing his chosen seat after putting on the clean shorts. "My new friend is going to join me." He did not notice the surprise on either face of the staff, nor did he feel Kaguya's own disbelief from within the shadow. "Thou cannot seriously expect us to come out and dine with you." Kaguya realized now that Naruto had chosen a seat at the end, where the light would cast his shadow to the stool next to him. He truly did intend for her to come out and eat, and had apparently planned it from the beginning. "You made a friend?" Ayame asked, sounding at the same time doubtful yet conflictingly hopeful. Kaguya had observed Naruto for a long time now, and these two were perhaps the only exception to the rule in how Naruto was treated. While it was true there were those that didn't hold him in outright disdain, even the peers in Naruto's place of education were at best neutral towards him. So to hear he had finally made a friend, it was almost certainly a first. Although Kaguya wouldn't call herself a friend per se, yep. Naruto nodded gleefully, his cracked lips splitting in a huge grin. Despite how painful it must have been for him to smile with his wounds, he didn't seem to mind. "Here's the thing though, she's like, super shy." Naruto emphasized the last couple words for effect. "So it would really save me if you two would just kinda turn around and prepare the ramen while I wave her in, you know." They did as asked, although the ramen master's daughter still didn't appear totally convinced. As they went about their work, Naruto winked exaggeratedly down at his shadow, patting on the stool next to him as if to tell her exactly where to come out. Kaguya considered just ignoring him. She really did. It wouldn't have been hard for her to do it either. She had technically been doing it for 7 years already, after all. So this didn't have to be any different than all those times. Yet in the end she couldn't do that. She had already made her choice. From the moment she had decided to emerge from the shadow for the first time, she had committed herself to getting more involved with his life from then on. Of course, she didn't expect that to develop in such a way as this, least of all not so quickly. That just went to show how much she had underestimated Uzumaki Naruto and the kind of person he was. She would admit, however, she didn't hate this part of him. Kaguya emerged from his shadow, already sitting down on the tall stool. At her current height, she doubted her ability to have been able to climb up here otherwise without the power of levitation which she was currently incapable of. Naruto smiled, legs swinging back and forth in unrestrained joy, no doubt taking some small pride in his victory at coaxing her out. This was also the first time he got to look at her under proper light, inspecting her from top to bottom as if studying an alien species. Which would have been an accurate description of her, oh my. Ayame gave out an exclamation of surprise, turning around to see Kaguya there. Although Kaguya would admit she wasn't sure which was more shocking, the way she entered without making any sound or her seemingly alien-like appearance. Father, look, Naruto actually brought in a friend. Then again, maybe it was neither of those things, how rude. I told you, didn't I? Naruto crossed his arms and huffed, but it was clear there wasn't any actual fire to his pout. It was all just for show. Yeah. Ayame knew this too, waving him off and instead focusing solely on their newest customer. So what's your name, little girl? She asked, just condescendingly enough that Kaguya considered turning her to ash next. It was lucky for her that Kaguya had a mountain of reasons not to do so right at this very moment. Instead, Kaguya reached over, tugging on Naruto's sleeve for his attention. Naruto asked, looking back and forth between them. For a second, Kaguya thought he wasn't going to catch on before the realization lit up in his eyes. Oh yeah, so this is Kaguya-chan. There was a slight pause. Like I said, she's a little shy. So don't worry if she doesn't speak much. Or at all. Kaguya-chan, huh? Ayame intertwined her fingers over her heart. What a wonderful name. I don't know how you and Naruto became friends, but please take good care of him, okay? She said, as if entrusting Kaguya with her actual little brother. Order up. Not much more could be said as the master placed 2 steaming bowls of ramen in front of them. And I'll tell you what, in honor of this special occasion of Naruto bringing in his first friend, it's on us tonight. Naruto let out a cheer at the announcement before going to clap his hands together in thanks for the food. He paused just shy, suddenly remembering the Rinnegan eyes on his palms. Still not used to the eyes. And what he could do exactly without hurting them. He was noticeably conscious about the way he put his hands together and then the way he grabbed the chopsticks. As if he was afraid any wrong move might cause him to poke them out. Ayame noticed his weird movements, but said nothing of it as she no doubt just assumed it was another wound he was attempting to hide. The ramen master, however, appeared to realize more than he let on. At the very least, he had noticed the true severity of Naruto's injuries, unlike his daughter. Even still, he did not ask questions, nor did he pry. He simply did what was within his power, offering Naruto warm food and a temporary shelter. Nothing more, but considering his station it was enough. In respect of that, Kaguya decided she would do him the royal honor of sampling the small offering he had prepared for her. What kind of god would she be if she didn't respond to the people's tribute every once in a while, after all? Kaguya took her chopsticks, mimicking the standard customs she had just witnessed Naruto perform before she too began to study her food. It was truly different from her time, but she would say she did not dislike the smell of it. Slowly, and ever so carefully she lifted the steaming noodles from the broth. After blowing on the noodles to cool them a little, she finally inhaled her first bite. She savored the texture, enjoying the taste that was unlike anything she had experienced before. The heat spread from her mouth and then warmed her whole body. Truly, humankind was a disgusting and foul race. But she would admit it. They knew how to prepare food suitable for even the palate of a god. Good. Naruto asked, grinning cockily at her. He had paused his own consumption, something she knew he rarely did if it wasn't already all devoured, all just so he could rub it in her face how delicious the ramen was. As if he had been telling her that all along. HMPH. Kaguya turned her nose up at him. But nevertheless she went in for a second, helping only moments later, scooting her bowl to the side so she wouldn't have to look at him while she ate. Although she could do nothing about the slight blush, that was made only more apparent on her pale skin. Adorable. Ayame could contain it no longer, practically dancing around the entire back of the kitchen. It looked like at any moment she might fly over the top of the counter to tackle Kaguya in a hug. Where did you find such a cute little girl, Naruto? Again, Kaguya considered turning her to ash. And again, Ayame was saved. This time because Kaguya would acknowledge that even under a new world order, She would need to be kept around in order to continue serving more of this ramen. Things settled down after that, all conversation ceasing so the two customers could enjoy their meals while they were hot. For Kaguya's first meal in over 1,000 years, she would say it had been pretty good, all things considered. If this was what the common folk normally ate, she could only imagine what those at the top must be allowed to consume. Thanks for the food. Naruto finished first, despite having a far larger bowl than Kaguya. She wasn't far behind, eating perhaps the fastest she ever had, even when compared to how she ate as an adult. As Kaguya had suspected, but the rate of Naruto's recovery had increased dramatically after he started eating. She suspected his body naturally burned the calories, converting them into the power necessary for his natural healing attribute. Come again soon, alright. Ayame reached over and rubbed Naruto's head affectionately. That means you too, Kaguya-chan. She then turned, winking at the petite woman. Kaguya ignored her, jumping down from the stool, falling the rest of the way to the floor to land dexterously on her feet. Naruto called his goodbyes over his shoulder, slumping down next to her, keeping extra caution of where his shadow was at all times so he didn't accidentally knock her over again. Kaguya reached up with one of her tiny hands, wrapping her fingers around Naruto's left pinky and ring finger. The two of them pretended not to hear Ayame's swooning yell as they walked out from the shop together. Although once they were back out on the main street, it was hard for Kaguya to ignore the curious gaze Naruto had as he looked down at her. Do not misunderstand, she whispered. It would merely be inconvenient for us to walk otherwise. Her tiny legs did not exactly carry her anywhere quickly on their own, and holding onto Naruto helped her make sure they kept pace with one another so she didn't get pulled around needlessly by his shadow. Okay. Naruto responded simply. He didn't make fun of her, nor did it seem like he had any intention to. Instead, he smiled warmly. It was perhaps one of the most genuine gestures of warmth she had ever seen him display, as they did not come easily to someone who was only ever given coldness their whole lives. With the only exception being the ramen behind them. He then nodded at the opposite end of the street. Kaguya followed his gaze, noticing a shop marked with 2 crossed kanai above the door. He explained after she found it, they sell ninja gear and equipment. I was thinking of getting some gloves, to cover up these. He lifted his free hand, pointing the Rinnegan right at her. Kaguya nodded. This is wise. She agreed. What she didn't think was wise, however, was her walking around in public with him. If it was just to the weapons shop, she would allow it though. When was the last time she stretched her legs? Not that her muscles experienced things such as atrophy like a human might have. So the two of them made their way across the street as quickly as possible. It wasn't easy, having to constantly dodge back and forth around the pedestrians walking past either way. That was without considering that several belligerents sought to run into Naruto purposefully upon noticing it was him. Most of them diverting at only the last second when they realized he wasn't alone. In the end they made it without incident, and with the sound of a small bell the door to the weapon shop swung open. Welcome, the older clerk began to call out, stopping when he saw who it was. He eyed Naruto wearily, as if he was a thief here to rob him of everything he had and not a paying customer as intended. His gaze fell on her next and she returned his glare right back. Even in child form, not many could stand the heated stare of a Byakugan, and this man was no exception, quickly averting his eyes and returning to read some newspaper he had placed on the counter. Aside from him, there was no one else in the shop. They were the only customers right now, although Kaguya suspected it would remain that way if anyone had seen Naruto enter. Very few would willingly enter the same space as he was in, which meant his very presence was bad for business. This meant Naruto got thrown out of most shops immediately, so even being allowed in was a step up for him. Although it was unlikely his tolerance would be accepted for long. The man was already making troubled grunts as the two lingered by the entrance. Not that Naruto seemed to care, humming to himself as if to show he didn't even notice, only slowly meandering in as he took in all the sights. Kaguya couldn't help but smirk. Whether it was intentional and Naruto was just being vindictive or not, she couldn't help but enjoy the little display he was putting on. Regardless, she would feel more relaxed if she could take care of what they came here for. Naruto didn't realize it, but he was playing a dangerous game by not concealing her or the Rinnegan. This was her fault, as she had not yet stressed the importance of such things to him yet. No doubt there was a long conversation awaiting them tonight, when they were away from any prying eyes. Before making his way to the gloves, Naruto stopped in front of a glass case filled with a myriad of swords. So cool. Naruto admired them, looking in particular at a giant blade larger than he was tall. Such foolishness. Kaguya sneered, snapping him from his delusions. The minerals used to smelt that sword are of the lowest quality. Thy money would be much better spent on another blade. Kaguya had no kind of concept of modern money, but she imagined the long string of zeros at the end of the price tag did not signify affordability. Yeah, then what do you recommend? Naruto snapped back at her, voice challenging her to pick a better weapon. She saw no point in entertaining such a pointless game, as Naruto most certainly did not possess the funds to purchase even the cheapest of these swords. Still, she would not have the value of her eye questioned and so scanned over the assortment in the display case before her. Finally, she found it. This one, she said, pointing at a tanto, a short sword no bigger than Naruto's forearm, made of steel so pure it almost looked white. The hilt guard was the red spiral pattern of Uzushiogakure, and most impressive was the handle of the blade itself. The black leather concealed beneath it a complex array of seals designed to more easily channel chakra directly into the blade. Naruto wrinkled his nose in dissatisfaction. Couldn't you have picked something more romantic? I would just get made fun of for swinging one of these around. It's barely bigger than a kunai. His hyperbole was not lost on Kaguya. The blade was easily twice the length of one of the daggers Naruto was now referring to. Of course, it was all about relativity, and anything would seem short when compared to the impractical monstrosity Naruto wanted. If you're just gonna badmouth my swords, get lost, you damn brats. The old clerk must have heard them, shouting over the top of his newspaper without even looking in their direction. He had not even seen which sword Kaguya was pointing to. As she realized this, a sinister idea began to form in the back of her mind. She had not attempted something like it before, but she saw no reason why it shouldn't work. Especially if it was this sword. Alright already, geez. Naruto didn't even notice the evil grin that spread across Kaguya's face. Instead, he began to pull her along, his shadow falling over the sword they had just been looking at as they passed it by. It was at that moment Kaguya tested her theory, unbeknownst to anyone else. The two of them made it over to the gloves, which were located in the back of the store and out of sight from the clerk and his desk. 2,000 ryo for some gloves, so damn pricey. Naruto groaned despondently as he looked across the selection. We do not understand. Kaguya tilted her head. Unlike with swords, she did not see any measurable difference between one pair of gloves and the next. Are such things not considered a standard commodity? Should they not be provided for their warriors? When she had ruled, her military would not have to pay for things like this themselves. An army would not have functioned back then if they had been required to. Not exactly sure what you're talking about, but… Naruto rubbed the back of his head, still not entirely grasping the complexity of Kaguya's language. They don't just give these things away. And I don't make much of an allowance. Not until I graduate from the academy in about a month, at least. Humanity has grown complex since we've been sealed, it would appear. Kaguya rubbed her chin, still trying to clear her head of all her old assumptions. She had mistakenly believed that humanity was incapable of evolution, but it would seem they had developed all kinds of systems she had seen no need to understand until now. Of course, once she ruled again she could undo many of them. However, until then she was going to need to learn to play their silly games. What in the fuck? There was a sudden loud commotion that interrupted their conversation, the store clerk storming over towards them with loud footfalls. Naruto's entire body bristled as if a wild animal, pupils dilating as the old man rounded the corner and stalked up to them. Where is it, you damn thief? He shouted, pointing a finger accusingly at the young blonde. I don't know what you're talking about. Naruto deadpanned, and it was the truth. Of course, just because it was the truth didn't mean he was going to be given the benefit of the doubt. Innocence meant nothing when the people had already decided you were guilty of a different crime, the sword. You stole the sword. A vein so large it looked like it might burst popped up atop the old man's head, his face a sweltering shade of red that was almost comical. In contrast to this, Naruto just looked at him dumbfounded, pulling at his pockets to show they were empty aside from his frog-shaped wallet. I don't have anything, do you, Kaguya-chan? Naruto asked, looking down at the shorter girl. She smiled, silently enjoying the exchange, as she lifted her sleeves to reveal nothing. Never mind the fact that she was so short it would ordinarily be impossible for her to hide anything, let alone a sword of any kind. You damn brat, I know it was you. The clerk appeared to have enough, hand reaching forward to grab Naruto by the mop of blonde hair on his head. He had no idea how close to death he just was. The smile on Kaguya's face disappeared immediately. Her arm was still lowered, but she had already curved her hand into the shape of a finger gun, index finger extended and thumb pointing up. Just as a small gray bone started to poke past her flesh, was the man saved from himself. That's far enough. The hand of a fourth person reached out from between them, grabbing the store owner by the wrist. One moment there had been no one there, the next he was. He was a tall man with gravity-defying white hair. Aside from that, there wasn't much more information to be said about this new presence. He wore standard Konohagakure no Sato ninja attire and his face was almost impossible to see, the lower half covered with a mask and his left eye hidden by a slanted hite. Despite his seemingly harmless appearance, however, he put Kaguya immediately on edge. She hadn't even sensed him come in the store, let alone see him move just now when he appeared before them. The man had no presence, as if just a scarecrow rather than a human. No, to say he had no presence wasn't entirely correct. There was a pressure there, one concealed in his hidden left eye. Kaguya had no idea what it was, but she didn't like it. Being seen at all by one of Konohagakure's military was bad for her. Even more so by one with some kind of perceptive eye. It was too late for such regrets now. So the only thing she could do was keep her jutsu ready. If she decided he posed a threat, she would just eliminate the both of them. No matter how skilled this man may be, no one could survive being hit by her jutsu. A ninja? The clerk couldn't decide between being shocked by the sudden appearance, remaining angry as before, or being relieved at the presence of an authority figure. So his words came out as some odd combination of all three. However, it quickly became apparent that he thought of this as beneficial to himself. Just in time, he growled, shaking his hand free to once again thrust an accusatory finger at Naruto. This brat stole one of my swords. The masked man blinked slowly, lazily even as he stared at the red-faced store clerk with something akin to pure nihilism. He then slowly turned his head, looking down at Naruto who simply folded his arms in defiance and glared back, as if daring him to do something. Finally, after several agonizing moments did the man speak again. Well, Naruto? He called the blonde by name, along with some sense of familiarity even. Is that true? He asked. I already said it isn't. Naruto stomped his foot, growing tired of going through this song and dance every time. Just because something bad happened when he was around didn't make him the problem. With that, the masked man shrugged. Well, seeing as how you don't seem to be holding any swords, I figured that had to be the case. He reasoned logically. You're going to take his side. Of course, this sense of logic didn't extend to the shop owner, spit flying from his mouth as he yelled now. Now, let's calm down. I'm not taking any sides here. The masked man said, holding up his hands to protect himself from the suddenly flying spittle. I'm just saying, isn't it possible you misplaced it? The very suggestion that the shop owner himself could somehow be the one at fault was the final straw for the old man. I want all three of y'all outta here. He bellowed at the top of his lungs, loud enough to rattle the windows. For the masked man and Kaguya, that was only all too agreeable. However, Naruto still hadn't accomplished what he had come here to do in the first place. At least sell me these gloves first. Naruto ripped the first pair he could off the wall, holding them up. It's the least you can do after accusing me of shit I didn't even do. 4,000 ryo, handed over right here in exact change. The man didn't even miss a beat, holding out the palm of his hand as if expecting Naruto to dump the contents of his wallet right there. Kaguya was almost surprised that he would accept any kind of transaction at all. Almost. That's double the price, you cheapskate. Naruto pointed at the price tag, indicating that they were marked at only 2,000. There's 2 gloves, aren't there? The man asked, as if Naruto was the stupid one for not understanding such a simple concept. Kaguya was ashamed to admit, but the logic didn't seem that insane to her. In any other situation, she might have believed that was the natural conclusion anyone would draw. This only reinforced to herself how dangerously naive she had become of the present times. I think that's enough here. Come on, Naruto. It wasn't until the masked man also seemed disgusted by the store owner's logic that Kaguya even realized the truth. A hand rested on Naruto's shoulder and started to guide him out, so Kaguya quickly took Naruto's fingers in her tiny hand again so as not to be separated from him. As all three of them exited quietly, Naruto looked up at the stranger, eyes asking for him why this newcomer had helped him just now, when anyone else would have just let it go, or worse have sided against him. His voice, however, asked a different question. Who are you? Well, you can just call me Kakashi, the man said, seemingly having deliberated about even giving him that much information. It was hard to tell if that was even his real name, and it most definitely didn't explain his relationship to Naruto. Anyways, here, Kakashi, as he called himself, wasn't done helping them yet. He pulled off his gloves, standard shinobi issue going by their appearance, but they were certainly more expensive than the ones Naruto had been looking to buy just now. Naruto looked down at the gloves suspiciously as they were thrust towards him, nose wrinkling as if he smelled something foul. You're just going to give them to me? He asked. His suspicion wasn't unwarranted. Not only was this man helping him, but now offering his gloves free of charge? The man looked up at the moonlit sky as he considered how best to answer. Think of it as an apology, he finally said, although what he was apologizing for was a mystery. It had been him that helped them out, even though he had no reason for the kindness that they knew of. Well, if you say so. Naruto hesitantly reached forward, taking the gloves without any kind of resistance. He had half expected the man to snatch them away just before he could and yell out it had been a prank. Even as Naruto slipped them on, he still didn't rule out the possibility the man would turn on them, accuse Naruto of stealing the gloves like he had just been accused of stealing the sword. Instead, the man bent down as he turned his attention now to Kaguya. And what about you, Oju-chan? How do you know Naruto? He did not ask her for her name, but she would not have given it to him anyways. However, asking her relationship to Naruto was in a way a good opportunity for her. She had been waiting to make the status of their relationship clear until now. He is our Uruji, she proclaimed clearly and proudly, placing her hands on her hips as she did so. Despite claiming him as her lord and master just now, it was actually more accurate to say he was the master of the shadow she inhabited. So he was not her own master by direct connection, but it was otherwise the simplest way to term their relationship to one another. There was a pregnant pause, neither Naruto nor Kakashi knowing how to react right away. What Kaguya did not expect, however, was the man to start chuckling, one eye closing in a smile as he reached forward and rubbed her head. Is that so? Good for him, he said, before then standing back to his full height and nodding once more at them. Be seeing you around, maybe. Try to stay out of trouble until then, if you can. With that, he turned around and started to walk away. Thanks, Naruto called after him before it was too late, not even sure his voice reached the fading back of the mysterious man. An over-the-shoulder wave signaled it had, and a moment later he disappeared into the crowd. So what now? Naruto asked, inspecting the new gloves that covered his hands. With his Rinnegan finally hidden, they had one less thing to worry about. We shall go out into the forest, Kaguya said, pulling at Naruto's hand to get him to move. Thou requires some instruction, and we imagine thou also have questions. For now, she just wanted to get him away from the crowds. There were too many potential problems out in public. Finally some answers. Naruto nodded, allowing himself to be guided along by Kaguya the first couple steps before taking the lead. It would be up to him to take them to a remote spot where they couldn't be bothered. He knew of a couple places, naturally. Someone as hated as he was needed a place to escape to once in a while. After that blow up in the shop too, he felt the need to get away too. What was that even all about anyways? Did someone actually steal a sword? He wondered aloud, not expecting an actual answer to that particular question. We did not steal, Kaguya insisted, surprising him when she lifted her sleeve once again. From the darkness inside the tip of the hilt came out. Everything in this world originally belonged to us. So this sword is our right, she explained simply, completely missing his look of shock. How? When? Naruto wanted to be angry at her. That whole mess could have been avoided if she had done nothing and just left the sword alone. When he thought about that store clerk though and how he tried to charge him double for the gloves, he couldn't bring himself to think that Kaguya had done anything wrong. In fact, they deserved that sword. For all the things he had been cheated out of in his life, it was about damn time he finally took something back. We told thou, this is a fine blade. Kaguya stated as if that answered his question. It channels one's chakra affinity and ours is yin itself. Pulling it into thy shadow was hardly any effort. It would be more accurate to say the blade fell in of its own accord. She finished her explanation, but Naruto still didn't really understand. He decided to leave it for now, as he could always ask her later to explain it with everything else, I think. Naruto started to say, squeezing Kaguya's hand a little more tightly as they walked. I'm really glad that you finally came out of my shadow. He had always felt like there was something there, but had also always assumed it was his imagination. Just some dark fantasy. Then when she had finally come out, he had been terrified. Mortified as she murdered 3 people in front of him. Not because she had murdered them, but because of how effortlessly she had done it. It was that same effortlessness with which she took something that didn't belong to her, yet was able to claim with confidence afterwards that it had always been hers. To have such confidence to go against everything he thought was normal up until now, it invigorated him. Filled him with the will to also want to change and somehow become like that. She may have called him her master, but he now felt it should be the other way around. These kinds of sentiments were a first for Kaguya, but she could not say she disliked it. To have someone voice happiness at the thought of being with her wasn't a bad feeling at all. Yes, we are somewhat happy too. Kaguya responded by squeezing Naruto's hand back, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. Human warmth, which she hadn't felt in over 1,000 years. Thanks for watching, guys.